Good morning, everyone. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I declare open the third meeting of state parties to the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, representatives of civil society, and esteemed participants, allow me to begin by expressing my profound gratitude for entrusting this honor to preside over the third meeting of state parties to the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It is my sincere pleasure to welcome you all to this important gathering. This meeting holds profound historical significance as we reflect on the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, the sole universal organization dedicated to maintaining global peace and security. Additionally, we mark 80 years since the first and only use of nuclear weapons in wartime, and a tragic reminder of the devastation they bring. We welcome all victims of nuclear use and testing, and we particularly recognize the presence of the representative of Nihon Hidanyanko in this room, who were awarded in 2024 the Nobel Peace Prize for their unwavering efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. 80 years after first nuclear blasts ignited the skies for the first time, we face an alarming reality. Their continued presence and potential deployment threaten global security now more than ever. The urgency of our mission is starkly highlighted by the doomsday clock, which now stands a bit closer to midnight, an alarming signal of escalating global tensions and the increasing nuclear threat. We must soberly acknowledge the stark reality. Heightened geopolitical tensions, the unchecked expansion and modernization of nuclear arsenals, and the increased nuclear rhetoric pose unprecedented risks. The international community must act decisively to reverse these dangerous trends. In the 4 years since its entry into force, the treaty already represents a significant milestone, having proved itself as effective disarmament and international legal instrument. However, sustained efforts are required to advance its universalization and implementation. I would like to highlight the historic significance of the first and second meetings of state parties held in Vienna and New York under the able presidencies of Austria and Mexico. Their declarations and decisions which laid a solid foundation that continue to guide our collective efforts. Dear colleagues, dear participants, the abolition of nuclear weapons is not an aspiration but an imperative. I am confident that our discussions will result in practical steps towards disarmament, universalization, and advancing of the humanitarian provisions of the treaty. A sizable presence of delegations from various regions and civil society representatives come to this conference from regions affected by nuclear use, manufacturing, and testing, including my own country, Kazakhstan, which suffered more than 450 tests in over 4 decades. Assistance and remediation is a topic that holds profound importance to the hearts of many people in Kazakhstan, the Pacific, and other regions. It is my hope that state parties can collectively agree on potential practical measures and ways to advance victims' assistance and environmental remediation efforts, including in the idea of establishment of international trust fund. I extend my sincere appreciations to the co-chairs of the working groups, the focal point and the facilitator for their dedicated efforts in implementing and universalizing the treaty during the intercessional period. At the same time, the role of civil society and non-governmental organizations has been invaluable in mobilizing public support, raising awareness, and reinforcing the global disarmament norms. Two key organizations that have played a pivotal role in promoting the TPNW and advocating for the abolition of nuclear weapons are the International Committee of the Red Cross and the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Both these organizations remain vital in ensuring the treaty's success by fostering political will, educating the public, and advocating for nuclear abolition. Distinguished participants, as we convene today, we bear a collective responsibility to move beyond rhetoric and into meaningful action. This meeting is not just a reaffirmation of commitments, but a critical opportunity to set in motion policies that will ensure nuclear disarmament becomes an irreversible process. We must not only reaffirm our dedication, but actively pursue measures that will lead to the complete abolition of nuclear weapons. Our discussions must yield tangible progress, reinforcing international norms against nuclear weapons and ensuring their permanent elimination. Let us reaffirm our unwavering resolve to eliminate this existential threat and translate our commitments into concrete action. I wish us all productive work ahead. I thank you for your attention. Dear colleagues, the meeting will now consider item 2 of the provisional agenda entitled Election of Officers. According Rule 6, Paragraph 1 of the Rules of Procedure, this meeting should elect 3 vice presidents. On 24th December, the Secretariat sent a note verbal to states parties soliciting candidatures for the position of vice presidents. I am informed by the Secretariat that the following candidature have been received: Austria, Cambodia, and Kiribati. As the number of candidates does not exceed the number of available positions, may I take it that meeting decides to dispense with the secret ballot for this election? I see no objection. It is so decided. We will now proceed to the election. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to elect Austria, Cambodia, and Kiribati as vice presidents of the 3rd meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? I see no objections. It is so decided. I congratulate vice presidents on their elections. The meeting has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of agenda item 2. I now invite delegations to turn to item 3 of the provisional agenda entitled Adoption of the Agenda. Consultations on the draft provisional agenda were held on 20th November 2024. The provisional agenda has been issued as document TPNW/MSP/2025/1. This document, as well as all other documents of these official documents of this meeting of state parties, is available on the website of the meeting. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to adopt the provisional agenda as contained in document TPNW MSP 2025/1. I see no objection. It is so decided. May I take it that the wish of the meeting to conclude its consideration of agenda item 3? I see no objection. It is so decided. I now invite delegations to turn to agenda item 4, entitled Confirmation of the Secretary General of the meeting. In accordance with Rule 13, Paragraph 1 of the Rules of Procedure, I wrote to the Secretary General of the United Nations to request him to designate an official to act as Secretary General of the meeting of the state parties. I am in respect of a letter from the Under-Secretary General and High Representative of Disarmament Affairs, dated 13th of January 2025, in which she informed me that she has, on behalf of the Secretary General, designated Mr. Christopher King, Chief of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Branch of the Office for Disarmament Affairs, to serve in the capacity of the Secretary General of TPNW, 3MSP. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to take note of the designation of Mr. Christopher King as Secretary General of this meeting? I see no objection. It is so decided. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to conclude its consideration of agenda item 4? I see no objection. It is so decided. The meeting will now consider agenda item 5, entitled Decisions Adopted in the Period Between Meetings of State Parties, in accordance with Rule 45. Rule 45 of the Rules of Procedure concerns decision-making in the period between meetings of the state parties. Paragraph 2 of that rule reads as follows, I quote, "The meeting of state parties shall take note of the decisions adopted through the procedure referred to in paragraph 1 of this rule and at its first meeting held after its adoption. The decisions shall be reflected in the report of the meetings at which the decisions are taken note of." End of quote. The decision taken since the second meeting of the state parties under the procedure in Rule 45, paragraph 1, are contained in document TPNW MSP 2025/CRP1. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to take note of this decision and to annex them to the report of this meeting? I see no objection. It is so decided. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to conclude its consideration of agenda item 5? I see no objection. It is so decided. Dear colleagues, let us now turn to agenda item 6, entitled Organization of Work. Delegations have before them an indicative timetable circulated as document TPNW MSP 2025-INF/3. I would like to stress that this is only an indicative timetable and would appeal for the flexibility of delegations to make best use of time available to us. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to take note of the indicative timetable as contained in document TPNW MSP 2025-INF/3? I see no objection. It is so decided. I should also like to draw the attention of delegations to a summarized version of the indicative timetable, which has been prepared for their reference and is available as document TPNW/MSP 2025/INF/4. The meeting has thus concluded this stage of its consideration of agenda item 6. I now invite you to turn to sub-item A, entitled Appointment of Members of the Credentials Committee of agenda item 7, entitled Credentials of Representatives to the Meeting. Rule 4 of the Rules of Procedure of this meeting reads as follows, I quote, "A Credentials Committee of 5 members shall be appointed at the beginning of the meeting of state parties on the proposal of the President. It shall examine the credentials of representatives and report to the meeting of state parties without delay." End of quote. In accordance with Rule 4, I propose that the following states parties be appointed as members of the Credential Committee: Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, Cape Verde, Ireland, Lao People's Democratic Republic. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to appoint Antigua, Barbuda, Belize, Cape Verde, Ireland, Lao People's Democratic Republic? I see no objection. It is so decided. I should like to inform the newly appointed members of the Credentials Committee that the committee's first meeting will take place at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon in room S30mm2. I think it's Secretariat building. Yeah. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to conclude its consideration of sub-item A of agenda item 7? I see no objection. It is so decided. The meeting will now consider agenda item 12, entitled Financial Matters. Delegations have before them the financial report, issued as document TPNW MSP 2025/9. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to take note of the financial report? I see no objections. It is so decided. I appeal to all state parties and observer states that have not yet done so to pay their assessed contribution in full as soon as possible. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to conclude its consideration of agenda items 12? I see no objection. It is so decided. The meeting will now consider agenda item 8, entitled High-Level Opening Session, addressed by the Secretary General of the United Nations and addressed by high-level officials. It is my pleasure now to give the floor to Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, Under Secretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, who will make a statement on behalf of the Secretary General of the United Nations. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends. It is an honor for me to represent the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, at the third meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I congratulate you, Mr. President, and the Vice Presidents on your elections. You have the full support of myself and of this Office for Disarmament Affairs for your work. Mr. President, when I spoke at the second meeting of states parties a little over a year ago, I quoted the Secretary General in saying that our world is becoming unhinged. Geopolitical tensions are rising. Global challenges are mounting. And as you yourselves then reaffirmed in the political declaration, and I quote, the continued existence of nuclear weapons and lack of meaningful progress on disarmament heightened the risk of nuclear catastrophe and pose an existential threat to humanity as a whole, end of quote. Sadly, these trends have continued and only intensified. Geopolitical tensions remain unresolved and are also dramatically evolving. Dangerous nuclear rhetoric and threats have not abated, and I am concerned that the unpredictable situations may exacerbate the public fear, leading to increased belief in the false narrative of nuclear weapons being the ultimate provider of security. Critical disarmament instruments are being eroded, and, unsurprisingly, this is contributing to a growing sense amongst non-nuclear weapon states, particularly in the South, that there is far little action on the part of those states that possess nuclear weapons. Yet, even in this challenging moment, there are reasons for hope, especially in relation to the full implementation of the TPNW. First, the global recognition of the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons continue to grow. The awarding of last year's Nobel Peace Prize to Nihon Hidankyo, whose delegates are present here today, is a case in point. Their decades of tireless advocacy have brought attention to the inhumane suffering caused by nuclear weapons. I take this opportunity to congratulate them once again on this well-deserved recognition and to reaffirm Secretary General Guterres' pledge that the legacy of the Hibakusha will be ensured. Second, the membership of this treaty continues to grow, with 4 additional states, Indonesia, Sao Tome and Principe, Sierra Leone and Solomon Islands, having ratified the treaty since our last meeting. Joining the TPNW sends an important signal to the international community, and I welcome the decision in this regard by these states. Third, there is the continuing broad cross-spectrum engagement with the treaty. By way of example, we have the presence of a good number of signatory and observer states in this meeting. We also continue to see active investment by civil society with organizations such as the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, and other committed NGOs raising awareness, advocating for disarmament, and supporting the treaty's implementation, including through amplifying the voices of affected communities and providing capacity building on how to join the TPNW. Fourth and finally, the Scientific Advisory Group continues to play a crucial role in supporting the treaty with rigorous, evidence-based research. I welcome the recent establishment of the TPNW Scientific Network, which has already held its first meeting and which will foster collaboration amongst experts from across scientific disciplines, reinforcing the treaty's credibility and implementation. Mr. President, The second meeting of states parties facilitated important advances in the TPNW's implementation, not least the expansion of the mandates of the intersessional process and the strengthening of the Vienna Action Plan. However, I believe this meeting has a special obligation. As the last meeting of states parties before the TPNW's first review conference, it needs to lay the ground for success at what should be a milestone occasion. It should systematically map out what needs to be achieved between now and then. The review conference, of course, would not be merely a stock-taking exercise of progress made, but will set the strategic direction for the treaty's future. In taking decisions this week, you should be guided by what it is you want the first review conference to achieve. And in such volatile times, I believe ambitious outcomes are not only preferable but necessary for maintaining momentum. The alternative is the inertia that is born of cynicism. And there is a momentum to be maintained. The growing nuclear dangers have been a wake-up call for the vast majority of the world's citizens, that the threat of nuclear weapons did not end with the Cold War. Last year's Pact for the Future is a case in point, with its recommitment to the goal of the total elimination of nuclear weapons and its recognition of the devastation nuclear war would visit upon all humankind. I certainly hope, therefore, that you are able to agree on a political declaration that builds upon the language of the pact, one that continues to place the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons at the center and underscores the inherent dangers posed by the existence of these inhumane weapons. I hope it is a declaration that prioritizes victims' assistance and environmental remediation and demands that nuclear weapon states live up to the disarmament obligations and commitments they have undertaken. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this will be a busy week. It will set a stage for the review conference and the next phase of the treaty's existence. As we embark on our discussions, let us remain steadfast in our shared goal to consign nuclear weapons to history. I wish you productive discussions and meaningful progress in your deliberations. I thank you very much for your attention.
I thank you very much, Madam Undersecretary and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, for your statement. Dear colleagues, in accordance with the practice of the previous meetings of state parties, I will now give the floor to the representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross to take a statement on behalf of the President, to be followed by the Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and then Mr. Jiro Hamasumi of Nihon Hidanko, and Ms. Tarim Taukaro to speak on behalf of affected communities. In addition, if I see no objection, I would also give the floor to the Secretary General of the Agency for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to proceed accordingly? I see no objection, it is so decided. Dear colleagues, I now give the floor to Ms. Laetitia Maria Isabel Courtois, Permanent Observer of the International Committee of the Red Cross to the United Nations, to make a statement on behalf of the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. You have the floor.
Mr. President, thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to represent the International Committee of the Red Cross at this third meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, alongside representatives of organizations and communities that have fought hard to outlaw these catastrophic and inhumane weapons. I deliver this statement today on behalf of the President of the ICRC. Today, almost half of the world's states have expressed their will to be bound by the TPNW. This is a groundbreaking achievement, a victory for multilateralism and a resounding call to make humanity the center of all debates and decision-making on nuclear disarmament. Let me highlight why the TPNW is so important. First, it fills a legal gap by comprehensively prohibiting nuclear weapons. The entire Red Cross and Red Crescent movement have been advocating for prohibition since witnessing the horrific impact of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Prohibition fully aligns with the rules and principles of international humanitarian law upon which the treaty is premised. Second, it advances nuclear disarmament. The prohibition of nuclear weapons is an indispensable step toward their elimination and an effective measure in line with Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Third, it seeks to mitigate the harm caused by past nuclear weapons use and testing on people and on the environment by establishing robust obligations regarding victim assistance and environmental remediation. Ultimately, the TPNW makes a real contribution to peace efforts. How can there be lasting peace in a world where nuclear weapons still exist? Mr. President, current geopolitical tensions, the ongoing modernization of nuclear arsenals, technological developments, changes in nuclear doctrines, and unbridled rhetoric all have alarmingly increased the risk of deliberate or accidental use of nuclear weapons. History and science show that any use would have catastrophic humanitarian consequences to which no state or international organization can respond. Threatening to use nuclear weapons through statements or other actions has become commonplace. Nuclear threats raise serious concerns from a humanitarian, legal, and ethical perspective. They increase the probability of use and risk normalizing it in political discourse and public opinion, thus eroding the long-established taboo. Nuclear threats are unequivocally prohibited under the TPNW and are inconsistent with the object and purpose of the NPT. By implying the possibility of using nuclear weapons, threats are abhorrent to the principles of humanity and the dictates of public conscience. I call on all states to consistently condemn nuclear threats, to lower the risk of escalation, and strengthen the nuclear taboo. I cannot stress it enough, Mr. President. Universalizing the TPNW is critical. I congratulate Indonesia, Sao Tome and Principe, Sierra Leone, and Solomon Islands on becoming contracting parties last year. Lastly, Mr. President, let me underscore the importance of ensuring the full and effective implementation of the treaty. As outlined in more detail in the ICRC's working paper, I call on states parties, 1, to reiterate deep concern for the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons, reaffirm the incompatibility of IHL, and condemn any threat of use of nuclear weapons by anyone. 2, to continue and advocate work toward the establishment of an international trust fund for victim assistance and environmental remediation. 3, to agree on concrete actions to highlight the security concerns posed by the continued existence of nuclear weapons based on the outcome of the consultative process. And 4, to explore, develop, and promote complementarity and synergies with the NPT and WFC treaties, together with all states parties to those treaties. The complete elimination of nuclear weapons is an unwavering priority for the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. We will continue to work tirelessly until a world free from nuclear weapons becomes a reality. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the International Committee of the Red Cross to the United Nations for her statement on behalf of the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. I give now the floor to Ms. Melissa Park, Executive Director of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons.
Mr. President, Excellencies, friends, 8 decades ago, 2 nuclear weapons, considered small by today's standards, obliterated the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. More than 250,000 people perished, the vast majority of them Japanese and Korean, including some 38,000 children. Others, like Jiro Hamasumi from Nihon Hidankyo, who is speaking today, managed to survive and have dedicated their lives to warning humanity of the nuclear peril. I thank him and all other hibakusha for their courageous, unstinting advocacy and congratulate them once again on their Nobel Peace Prize. The hibakusha have always been clear in their demand for abolition, not just arms control and non-proliferation, but the total elimination of nuclear weapons worldwide. Anything less is inadequate, given the gravity of the threat these devices pose to all life on our planet. With few exceptions, these hibakusha who are alive today were children in 1945. Through their young eyes, they witnessed unimaginable horror. Last October, I was struck by the words of Toshiyuki Mimaki, a co-chair of Nihon Hidankyo, who survived the Hiroshima bombing as a 3-year-old boy. Responding to the Nobel announcement, he said that his foremost wish was to please abolish nuclear weapons while we, the hibakusha, are alive. Next week, he will turn 83. Why can his vision not be realised? Too many people have become resigned to the view that nuclear weapons are a permanent fixture in our world. We must never accept that idea. Nuclear weapons were built with human hands and they can be dismantled with human hands. This is not a utopian dream. The fact that large geographic regions have been declared free of such weapons suggests that one day the entire world can be. As states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, you are leading us in that direction. You have each rejected nuclear weapons, completely and forever, for yourselves and for all. It is especially significant that the country presiding over this meeting, Kazakhstan, once had more than 1,400 nuclear weapons on its territory. It relinquished them all. South Africa, another prominent supporter of the TPNW, has also shown that disarmament is possible by dismantling its arsenal of apartheid-era nuclear bombs. There are no technical barriers to eliminating nuclear weapons, only political ones. With leadership and resolve, progress could be achieved very rapidly. In challenging times like these, we might be inclined to lower our expectations, to temper our demands. But the higher the stakes, the more ambitious we must be. Indeed, historically, some of the greatest breakthroughs in the field of disarmament have emerged out of situations of crisis. Our focus must remain on elimination, not simply extending the period of non-use of nuclear weapons. And we must insist that elimination be pursued not as a distant dream, but an urgent necessity. Without action soon, a nuclear catastrophe, perhaps orders of magnitude deadlier than the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, is all but inevitable. As John F. Kennedy famously warned in this very building in 1961, the weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us. More than 6 decades on, it is clear our time is running out. The doomsday clock is ticking. All 9 nuclear-armed nations continue to upgrade and expand their nuclear forces with no plans in place for disarmament. And dozens of their allies aid and abet this nuclear madness. Even at a time of global chaos and upheaval, some still claim, self-servingly, that nuclear weapons bring balance and peace to the world. Their arguments ring hollower by the day. Who today can confidently assert that nuclear weapons will never be used again, whether by accident or design? 12,000 doomsday devices, many on high alert, at more than 100 locations across the globe, major conflicts involving nuclear-armed states, escalating confrontation and threats. the increasing use of artificial intelligence in the military, a new nuclear arms race underway. What could possibly go wrong? The litany of nuclear accidents and near misses during the Cold War and in the years since must serve as a warning to all of the dangerous fallacy of nuclear deterrence, a theory invented to excuse inaction on disarmament and disguise the immorality of possessing the means to kill and maim on a massive scale. Nobel Peace Laureate Joseph Rotblat, the only nuclear scientist to leave the Manhattan Project on moral grounds, said that nuclear deterrence is the ultimate form of terrorism. The insidious reality is that manufacturing of these weapons, their maintenance and their eventual disposal all cost the earth, even without any direct use. These weapons displace people and communities from cradle to grave, diverting funds and scientific know-how from pressing global needs. Deterrence theory is a distraction and an abstraction. The reality is these weapons create harm on many levels through their very existence. Survivors of the more than 2,000 nuclear weapons tests conducted so far in the world can verify the breadth of harm from developing this supposed deterrent. Distinguished colleagues, there are 5 key messages I believe we, as members of the TPNW community, must communicate more widely. 1, so long as any country has nuclear weapons and insists they are necessary for their security, others will want them. The continued failure of possessor states to advance disarmament will only lead to further proliferation. 2, so long as nuclear weapons exist, they are bound one day to be used, whether by accident or design. Thus, the only way to eliminate the risk of their use is to eliminate the weapons themselves. 3, any such use would be utterly catastrophic for life on this planet. 4, as TPNW states parties have made clear, the promotion of and reliance on nuclear deterrence poses an existential security risk for all countries. And 5, disarmament is eminently achievable. Of all the global challenges we face, this is the least complex. All it requires is political will and leadership. I thank each of you for exercising true leadership and doing your part to advance this vital cause, to ensure that there are no more victims of the use or testing of nuclear weapons. Today, exactly half of all countries in the world have joined the TPNW, either as parties or signatories. We know that many more countries support this landmark treaty. You are the global majority. Do you know how powerful you are? Each new signature and ratification will make the treaty stronger and more effective. Please consider what more your President, Prime Minister or Foreign Minister could do to advance the goal of universal adherence. This treaty is solidifying the global norm against the use and possession of the only devices ever created that can destroy all complex life on Earth. And it is bringing us closer to the goal of eliminating them once and for all in our lifetime. Thank you.
I thank the Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons for her statement. And now give the floor to Mr. Jiro Hamasumi of Nihon Hidankyo. You have the floor, sir.
私は広島で被爆し、現在、日本原水爆被害者団体協議会日本被団協の事務局長代行としております浜住二郎と申します。核兵器禁止条約の第3回締約国会議で発言できる機会をいただき、感謝を申し上げます。日本被団協は、2024年のノーベル平和賞を受賞しました。受賞理由で、核兵器は二度と使ってはいけないということを証言で示したできたこと、核兵器の使用は道徳的に容認できないという国際規範が形成され、核のタブーとして知られるようになった。
Nihon Hirankyo received the Nobel Peace Prize 2024.
If you could start over.
I'm going to start again. Hello, I experienced the atomic bomb in Hiroshima, and I'm currently an acting Secretary General of Nihon Hirankyo, Japan Confederation of Atomic and Hydrogen Bomb Sufferers Organizations. I'm Hamasumi Jiro. Thank you for this opportunity to speak in this third meeting of state parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Nihon Hirankyo received the Nobel Peace Prize 2024. In explaining the reason for the award, the Nobel Committee recognized Hibakusha's tireless effort to show, through their testimonies, that nuclear weapons should never be used again, which then helped create a nuclear taboo, an international norm that the use of these weapons cannot be morally accepted. The committee also acknowledged as one encouraging fact that no nuclear weapon has been used in nearly 80 years, but that today, this taboo against the use of nuclear weapons is under pressure. The committee urged people to remind themselves that nuclear weapons are the most destructive weapons the world has ever seen. I was exposed to the atomic bomb when I was 3 months old in my mother's womb. That day, my father had left early in the morning for work near the hypocenter and never came home. Even now, not a single day goes by without me thinking about him. To me, that war has not ended yet, because there are still 12,120 nuclear weapons in the world, and 4,000 warheads are ready to be launched at any time. We Hibakusha atomic bomb survivors cannot feel safe until the number of nuclear weapons is reduced to 0. For young cells exposed to the atomic bomb in mothers' wombs, the effects of radiation are unimaginable. There are those who are exposed to the atomic bomb at very close distance during their mother's early pregnancy. Some of them are known as Hibakusha with atomic bomb microcephaly, and they have suffered from physical and intellectual development delays. It is said that those in utero survivors are stigmatized as Hibakusha even before they were born. The atomic bomb is a devil's weapon that robs victims of their future and torments their families. We must not repeat the tragedy of the atomic bombings. In the 11 years following the atomic bombings, when the Hibakusha needed help the most, we were left abandoned. And the media coverage of the bombings was restricted. In 1945 alone, 210,000 people died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then in 1954, fishermen on tuna fishing boats were exposed to the so-called ashes of death from a hydrogen bomb test at Bikini Atoll, and the movement to ban atomic and hydrogen bombs began. At the height of the movement, in August 1956, Nihon Hirankyo was founded. In its founding declaration, we pledged to save humanity from its crisis through the lessons learned from our experiences, while at the same time saving ourselves. we must not allow our children, grandchildren, or the people of the world to experience the hell we went through. To this day, we have never given up and continued to appeal domestically and internationally. Don't create another Hibakusha. Eliminate nuclear weapons. We have upheld two fundamental demands. One, the atomic bomb victims must be compensated by Japan, the country that carried out the war. And two, nuclear weapons, extremely inhumane and must not be allowed to coexist with human beings, must be eliminated immediately. We are still halfway there in both, but we, Hibakusha, will not give up. We will continue to pass on our atomic bomb experiences through our testimonies. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is the first international treaty that was realized 76 years after the atomic bombings and embodies a long-cherished desire of the Hibakusha. It is a great joy that we now have an international law that states that nuclear weapons are illegal in any respect. We strongly hope that the third meeting of state parties to the TPNW will build on the discussions that have taken place thus far and make progress on how to develop and inform the world about the treaty, as well as on the assistance for nuclear victims, environmental remediation, funding, and other issues. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Hamasumi for his statement. It was really strong. Dear colleagues, I now give the floor to Ms. Taraim Taukaro, who will make a statement on behalf of affected communities. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great respect that I extend my warmest greetings to you in my native language. I am Tarem Taukaro, hailing from Christmas Island in the Republic of Kiribati. As a young married woman and a proud mother of two beautiful daughters, I consider it a profound honor to be here today. My presence is made possible through the generous support of the government of Kiribati, the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and its youth initiative, Reverse the Trend. Today, I am privileged to share with you my family's experiences during the nuclear testing era on Christmas Island. My maternal grandparents arrived on the island in the early 1950s as laborers for the copper plantation during the colonial period. My mother, Dewa Tokonau, was born on April 17, 1955, as the fourth child in her family. At the tender age of 2, she witnessed the United Kingdom's first hydrogen bomb test on November 8, 1957. And by the age of 7, she was present for the final hydrogen bomb test conducted by the United States in July 1962. Throughout my life, my mother has shared her experiences as well as those of her parents and older siblings regarding the British and American nuclear testing campaigns. According to family accounts, the nuclear tests were profoundly terrifying and unsettling ordeal. They were frequently instructed to leave their homes under cover of darkness, initially to the ship Narvik for the first field test, and subsequently to the old London tennis court. Despite attempting to protect themselves by covering their ears, they were unable to escape the deafening sounds of the explosions. Even when they shut their eyes tightly and shielded themselves with thick blankets, the blinding flashes of light still penetrated. The heat generated by the detonations, even from miles away, was felt against their skin. Each time a test was conducted, children could be heard crying in fear. The long-term consequences of these tests have continued to affect my family. My mother has suffered from bleeding gum since her childhood. My elder sister was born deaf, and when her condition exacerbates, she endures severe headaches and redness in her eyes. Her physician has advised her to protect her ears from water exposure. During my own elementary and high school years, I fainted on several occasions without any apparent cause. Medical examinations revealed no abnormalities, yet the uncertainty regarding our health continues to linger. I earnestly advocate the comprehensive medical assessments for my family and myself. Currently, my mother, Dewa Teronau, serves as the chairperson of the Association of Cancer Patients Affected by British and American Nuclear Bomb Testing, abbreviated ACBAN-BT. This association represents the descendants of the 187 families who resided on Christmas Island during the nuclear tests. Since its inception in 1964, the association has actively campaigned for compensation and medical examinations. Today, I seize this opportunity to amplify their voices and strengthen their call for justice, compensation, and essential medical assistance. I firmly believe that the time for action is now. I aspire for my children to receive adequate medical care, ensuring their health remains uncompromised by the nuclear tests conducted over 7 decades ago. Moreover, I express my deep appreciation to the state parties of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, particularly for Articles 6 and 7, which provide a glimmer of hope for justice and acknowledgement for those of us who have been impacted by the nuclear arms race during the Cold War. In conclusion, I extend to you my Kiribati traditional blessings of the Maori, good health, Deroi, peace, and the double prosperity. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Taukara for her statement. Dear colleagues, we will now proceed to hear addresses by high-level officials. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Enrique Ochoa, Deputy Minister of Foreign and Multilateral Affairs of Mexico. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, President. At the outset, I wish to congratulate you on behalf of my government for having risen to this high-level responsibility. I also applaud the High Commissioner for Disarmament Affairs, Ms. Nakamitsu, and we're very grateful for the message that you shared with us on behalf of the Secretary-General. Thank you very much. Mr. President, in 2023, through the current Permanent Representative of Mexico, Dr. Juan Ramón de la Fuente, Mexico is honoured to head up the second meeting of the parties, during which a political declaration was adopted with robust messages rejecting the false premises of nuclear deterrence. Since then, we have borne witness to significant progress in the framework of the consolidation of our treaty. 4 states have ratified it. Now, we have 73 states parties and 96 signatories. Whilst other disarmament fora are in deadlock, the TPNW continues to strengthen itself as a pillar of the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. This is a forum that is focused on diplomatic dialogue and above all focused on action. In addition to it being an inclusive forum, it enables us to hear from a range of different voices, and largely as a result of our different geographic origin and the diversity of our membership. It's also an inclusive forum where we hear and listen to people, and we also hear from the voices of civil society. The TPMW closed the legal loophole that existed on nuclear weapons vis-à-vis other weapons of mass destruction. Further, the treaty was innovative because it included specific provisions on gender. This is something that particularly speaks to us in Mexico, because today we have our first female president, a presidenta, with an A at the end in the feminine form. Mexico has a feminist foreign policy and has served as the gender focus point since the second meeting of the States Party. We call upon all States Parties to not allow any type of regression on gender, especially given the wave of policies in the opposite direction that unfortunately we have been seeing here at the United Nations. While we have made steps towards a world of peace within the framework of this treaty, current geopolitical tensions have led us further from our common objective, which is a world free of nuclear weapons. Since the last meeting in 2023, the number of countries whose security is based on the so-called nuclear umbrella has increased. Some voices are even calling for the development of nuclear weapons in states parties to the NPT, which runs completely counter to their international legal obligations. Mr. President, it's concerning how these geopolitical tensions have led to an increase in military expenditure, and this, in turn, has led to several developing countries several developed countries recently announcing a reduction in their ODA contributions. This is bringing us further and further away from what humanity needs. Resources should be for development, not for war or destruction. We, in light of this, are following the perfect formula for the annihilation of humanity. In Mexico, we believe that this will not lead us to any positive results. That's why, in the framework of the last G20 summit, President Sheinbaum proposed that 1% of military expenditure be instead dedicated to funding projects to tackle climate change and for sustainable development. This is underpinned by the new model that we have built in Mexico, which is Mexican humanism, based on the principles of community development and shared prosperity, promoting inclusion, equality, and social justice. Recent years that have seen various crises and exacerbation of conflicts have also seen the emergence of threats to use nuclear weapons and more voices who are advocating for or even trivializing their use. This rhetoric should not be tolerated or normalized. Mexico condemns any threat to use nuclear weapons, be it explicit or implicit, by any actor and under any circumstances. This also applies to the doctrine of deterrence that is based on the credible threat of the use of nuclear weapons or the threat to use them for coercion. It's important that the states parties to the TPMW continue to reiterate this condemnation, and that's why we urge everyone present here to call out robustly the fact that there is no such thing as responsible nuclear rhetoric, nor any supposed responsible use of these weapons. All threats to use nuclear weapons are illegitimate and are counter to the United Nations Charter. We regret further that the disarmament and non-proliferation machinery of the United Nations, as well as the architecture of different agreements, commitments and obligations built in multilateral disarmament fora throughout the decades continues to ebb away. We're concerned that the trend that had been relatively stable on the possession of nuclear weapons in the hands of just 9 states could see some serious stepbacks by those that are calling for bigger and better arsenals, or even due to the skewed concept of so-called friendly proliferation and other narratives to justify more states possessing nuclear weapons, including those who are calling for the resumption of nuclear tests in states parties to the CTBT. We're also extremely concerned that some nuclear weapon states have modified their doctrines to reduce the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. Others are even boasting about using artificial intelligence to improve the use of these weapons, despite the looming practical, legal and ethical implications if the decisions on the use of nuclear weapons, or any weapon, is outside of human control. Given these international challenges, among others, we need to continue to reinforce the standard established by the TPNW in order to continue to be an antidote to this logic of arming oneself and all risks that it brings with it. We also must recall that the Pact for the Future reiterates the commitment to the whole of the international community to the goal of the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Let us ramp up our efforts to prevent the catastrophic consequences and the humanitarian impact of these weapons of mass destruction. Mexico has taken due note of the high-level statements by a nuclear weapons state on the importance and the need to drastically reduce the 2 largest nuclear arsenals in the world. These statements are welcome if they truly result in a resumption of negotiations between the nuclear weapon states and towards tangible disarmament. The states parties to the TPNW must be clear in support for possible measures to reduce arsenals and also be vocal when we see steps in the wrong direction. In just 4 weeks, in this very forum, we will see the 3rd preparatory committee meeting of the MPT, and all TPNW parties are also party to the MPT, and we believe that both treaties are compatible with each other and strengthen each other. That's why we must demand that the results that emanate from that strengthen the regime established by the MPT and do not water it down or reinterpret it. We must say this very directly. We need to see tangible progress in the area of nuclear disarmament. Less nuclear saber-rattling. 12,000 nuclear weapons in the world, these things are not guaranteeing our security, but however they are putting the survival of the whole of humanity and the pandemic and the planet at risk. Before I wrap up, I wish to most sincerely thank the organisation Nihon Hidanko for having obtained the Nobel Peace Prize in 2024 and reiterate the testimony that we heard today from the Hibakusha. This must be heard. President, reaching and continuing in a world free of nuclear weapons must be an ethic imperative for our collective security and for human security. We're sure that all of those that are participating in this meeting today will spare no efforts to ensure that this objective becomes a reality. Thank you very much.
I thank the Deputy Foreign Minister of Mexico for his statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Flavio Roberto Bonzanini, Secretary General of the Agency for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished delegates, in my capacity as the Secretary General of the Agency for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, OPANAL, it's an honor to address this 3rd meeting of the states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Before I begin with my remarks, I'd like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to Ambassador Akın Rahmetulin on your election as president of this crucial meeting. I am convinced that under your leadership, the states parties in the TPNW will take the necessary decisions to advance the implementation of the treaty. In this regard, Mr. President, you can count on the full support of OPANAL in all your activities. Mr. President, OPANAL constitutes a pioneer operative specialized regional agency dedicated entirely to the achievements of nuclear disarmament and the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons in the 33 Latin American and Caribbean countries. Created by the Treaty of Tlatelolco in 1969, the contracting parties committed to the peaceful use of the nuclear material and facilities under their jurisdiction and to prohibit and prevent the testing, use, manufacture, production or acquisition, receipt, storage, installation, deployment, and any form of possession of any nuclear weapon directly or indirectly in their respective territories. Its principles and objectives complement and reinforce the provisions of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Building upon Tlatelolco's legacy by advancing the global commitment to eliminate nuclear weapons, highlighting the shared objectives of the two treaties and their mutually reinforcing contribution to the global nuclear disarmament regime. For a better comprehension of the synergies and complementarities between both instruments, states parties to the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean submitted a working paper on the matter in this meeting. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, increasing resort to the threat of using nuclear weapons have shaped today's defining geopolitical scenario, posing complex obstacles to international efforts towards nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Amidst this deteriorated context, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons sets a cornerstones of legal instrument to strengthen the prohibition norm established by the treaties that created nuclear weapons-free zones and the first non-proliferation regime. In this sense, universality challenges still surrounds the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Please let me trace back the Treaty of Tlatelolco's great universality process. Initially, the broader Cold War geopolitical setting and the complexities of achieving a regional consensus on nuclear weapons disarmament hinder the path. Nevertheless, decades of diplomatic efforts, confidence building, measures, and regional cooperation became landmarks enabling us to overcome universality obstacles and solidifying its legacy as an adaptable model for regional nuclear disarmament. Nowadays, OPANAL member states' joint declarations and continuous international engagement in global disarmament conferences serve as a valuable model for advancing Article 12 of the TPNW. Therefore, I would take the opportunity to invite all states parties in a position to do so to conclude the ratification processes and adhere to the TPNW, recalling that an early universalization of the treaty will contribute to strengthening the global prohibition norm. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the first meeting of the states parties fostered procedural and institutional decisions for the treaty's effectiveness. The second meeting of the states parties consolidated an intersessional structure for its implementation through thematic joint informal working groups and further discussion on victim assistance, environmental remediation, and international cooperation. For this third meeting, OPANAL renews its support to the important decisions the states parties have to make with regards to the designation of a competent international institution designated in ensure compliance and remain committed to a world free of nuclear weapons through general, complete, transparent, irreversible, and verifiable disarmament. Long and sustained OPANAL institutional memory and experience on nuclear disarmament place the agency in a suitable position to support states parties in this endeavor. We recognize the pivotal role played by Kazakhstan and Kiribati as standing members of nuclear weapon-free zones and their continued efforts to support nuclear testing victims in Central Asia and the South Pacific. Nationally, through measures for their treatment, health improvement, rehabilitation, social protections of the population, and socio-economic development of the territory, and internationally through the joint initiative on an international trust fund for victim assistance and environmental remediation. To deepen these efforts, epistemic nuclear justice constitutes a promising policy approach to ensure nuclear testing affected community, their health. Issues are taken seriously by the right authorities and any environmental harm is recognized. By achieving epistemic nuclear justice, deprivation of access to historical and scientific data on nuclear testing could be remedied and strengthen any state effective implementation of its rehabilitation and remediation efforts. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, this year marks the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, an unfortunate episode in our history that reminds us of these weapons' devastating and dehumanizing effects. Only a year ago, the Japanese organization Nihon Hidankyo, the Bakusha received the Nobel Peace Prize for its grassroots movements efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons and for demonstrating through witness testimony that nuclear weapons must never be used again. In this line, it is pivotal to keep up with the momentum and redouble our efforts that have led up to the TPNW signature and ratification status. For this reason, I'd like to recall the key role of all states parties, signatory states, observers, and civil society organizations in joining efforts towards the strengthening, consolidation, and universalization of the treaty. The endeavor ahead is not of a simple nature, but I am convinced that our true shared commitment in a world free of nuclear weapons will ease our path to the treaty's advancement. Thank you so much.
I thank the Secretary General of the Agency for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean for his statement. Dear participants, we have heard the last speaker in the high-level opening session. May I take it that it is the wish of the meeting to conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 8? I see no objection, it is so decided. Before adjourning the meeting, I would like to give the floor to the Secretary General of the conference to make an announcement. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This is just an announcement that closed informal consultations will take place in this room at 12 o'clock on the draft political declaration. The declaration has just been circulated to states parties. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary General for this announcement. Dear colleagues, this concludes our business for this morning's meeting. The next meeting will begin prompt at 3 o'clock, 3 p.m. in this chamber. The meeting is adjourned. I thank you all.